All right, well, welcome back, or maybe not welcome back. This could be the first episode. I'm not too sure at this point. This is the wonderful world of YouTube and podcasts. So we've been spending about the last 3 years so far building businesses on both Shopify and different marketplaces across the web. And the intent today is to kind of run through the choice between either Shopify or other platforms to build your e-commerce brand. So we've got some different questions Jake and I are going to answer going through. But firstly, what I wanted to say is if you're joining us on YouTube, feel free to, or please, like and subscribe to the channel. If you're joining us on a podcast, there should be some kind of functionality to turn on notifications. So we'd like it if you could do that. And then if you like coffee, there'll be a link in the description to our coffee brand. But it's also a good opportunity for you to go on there and have a look at what we've done with Shopify. So you can kind of have a look and get some tips and ideas there as well. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Jake to walk us through the first bit.
Yeah, hey all, welcome, as Rory says. So the first thing we wanted to cover was what were the choices we had when, coming up with a platform for us to sell on, right? So there are many. You've got the standard marketplaces like Amazon, Etsy, and so on. eBay, another good example. Those were not what we were necessarily after, because although those are great, they bring plenty of inbuilt traffic. They also bring many other things. There are higher costs quite often with those platforms. But the key thing there is you don't control the customer base. And that for us was the key thing, that when we were deciding where we wanted to go, we didn't necessarily have a problem paying a little bit more because of the inbuilt traffic, which is essentially, you're paying for the marketing. We wanted to be able to control that customer experience. We wanted to make sure that we were giving a top quality service and that the customer was left 100% satisfied. And we wanted to take ownership of that. So we were looking for something we could essentially have our own website on. There were a couple of options really that we could have chosen. There was Shopify. You've got a WordPress, WooCommerce. Any of those really. There are plenty of other sort of build your own website style builders. You've got One-on-One, which I think is now called Ionos. They also do stuff like this. Ultimately, we chose Shopify, and the key reason being is, it is, in our opinion, one of the leaders, without a doubt, in the small e-commerce space. And in the grand scheme of things, the cost, Rory is going to go into a little bit more, but the cost versus the, manipulation that you can make of your website and whatnot, we think ultimately, makes for a really good combination. So yeah, high level, I think, you've got lots of options out there to choose from. We chose Shopify, and we think it's one of the best platforms out there for a brand to use if they want a website where they actually own the customer experience. So Rory's going to walk us through some of the cost differences.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you raise as well, mate, that there is tons of different choice out there, but really after all the research we'd done, we'd really sort of distilled it down to the difference between Shopify and WordPress with running WooCommerce. So that was the decision that we ultimately had to make.
100%.
And I think actually, it's nice that you kind of moved on to cost, because that was really ultimately probably one of the main driving factors for us choosing Shopify in the end. And that is kind of interesting because technically it's probably more expensive. In fact, it is more expensive to run it through Shopify, but I think it's less financial risk because I think they have built-in fraud protection and things like that. So I think, if you're just weighing it up on cost, you'd probably go for WordPress and WooCommerce. But if you start to bake in things like we'll get to later, your time and ease of use, actually, we thought the cost trade-off was worth it. So the first thing to look at really would be hosting costs. And Shopify doesn't necessarily have hosting costs, because when you pay for Shopify, you essentially pay a flat fee, and that includes your hosting and things like that. But if you're hosting WordPress with WooCommerce, you probably, I mean, to be honest, it could cost you anything, because you can choose different hosting providers, but be anywhere from £10 a month all the way up to a couple £100 a month, depending on how much manageability you've got, and the server speed and things like that. So the other thing that you have to take into account is domain name. So at some point you're going to want, yourbusiness.co.uk or yourbusiness.com, whatever it's going to be. Those typically, and that's going to cost the same whether you choose Shopify or WordPress, but those are typically going to set you back anywhere between £20 a year and upwards if you want, a prestigious .com domain. Shopify actually comes with a .shopify.com domain, so you could have your brand.shopify.com. I don't necessarily think that looks too professional. It kind of looks like a build a website type approach. So I don't know, if I was if I was coming to a site like that, I probably wouldn't purchase. So I think it's something to really think about. The main thing really though is transaction fees. So with the plan that we're on, there's free plans, and I'll go into those in a minute. The transaction fees are something like 2.2% plus 20p per transaction. If you were to go with WordPress with WooCommerce, depending what payment gateway you use, whether it be PayPal, Stripe, something like that, your fees potentially be a little bit less, especially if you use Stripe. But again, I think the sort of inbuilt fraud analysis, the fact that payments won't decline and you don't have to build your own SSL certificate and stuff like that, I think actually the transaction fees are worth it on Shopify. The other thing, and this can end up being a big cost, so I think this is a really interesting one actually, and I don't know, Jake, if you'd agree, but the App Store fees on Shopify can end up being pretty outrageous sometimes. You can end up spending sort of £30 a month upwards for an app to give you additional functionality on the store, and sometimes that functionality might be pretty minor. You might be looking to, have some kind of content management system looking after, your logistics providers or something like that, and you probably need some kind of app to pair them together. So I think that's one of the things that, might be a downfall on Shopify, is that quite often you have apps that you need to kind of extend the functionality, and those can be sort of quite expensive each month. With WordPress, actually, there's a lot of apps and things that are essentially free. The issue that you have with those, again, is sort of security. These apps are being updated by whoever, developers that are doing them for free. And although there's no malicious intent in those apps themselves, obviously quite often they go a long time without being updated. So you can find there's security holes in those kind of things. So just lastly then on cost, Shopify's got 3 plans. They've actually got 4, but the most basic plan I wouldn't recommend. Essentially, that would just allow you the functionality to put payment blocks on your own website that you might host elsewhere. So we won't look at that. What we're really talking about is the Shopify that allows you to build a website and then host all the back end of the transactions and stuff like that. So you've got Shopify Basic, which is $29 a month, which equates to probably about £20 at today's rate. That's what we actually use. Reason being is the additional functionality in Shopify and Shopify Plus, we don't necessarily need. Shopify at $79 a month allows you to have 5 user accounts. So essentially, if you've got a staff or a small staff that you want accessing different portions of the website, or the back end of the website anyway, that additional monthly fee might be worth it to you. And then you've got Shopify Plus at £300 a month, $300 a month actually. And that essentially gives you lower transaction fees. It gives you sort of premium support and some kind of complex reporting in the back end. Again, for us in our business, we didn't necessarily need that. There's actually a really, really high threshold in the millions, I think, of turnover before Shopify Plus and their slightly reduced transaction fee is actually worth the cut across. So yeah, I think I pretty much covered it there on cost, unless you've got anything to add there, Jake.
No, dude, I've got to be honest though. Like maybe it's showing that I'm hungry because I've just come up with like a weird analogy to kind of explain to those that perhaps don't necessarily know the nitty gritty, some of the key differences between the usability of Shopify versus say a WooCommerce or anything like that. And I look at it like fish and chips, right? So bear with me for 2 minutes. This is about to get a bit crazy, but I think this is what you guys are really after is, putting it into terms that everyone can relate to, right? So Shopify is the equivalent of walking into a fish and chip shop, right? Everything's there, it's built. If you want 25 bits of cod, they've got it ready to go. You can scale, and ultimately you're going to pay a basic fee to get your fish and chips. But like Rory mentioned, there are plenty of apps, etc., that you can purchase to get additional functionality. So that's the equivalent of buying your curry sauce or adding mushy peas and so on to really finesse your plate in our particular analogy, but your website or your functionality of your website. All of the payment, everything else, pretty standard, works beautifully and scales with you as you get hungrier. Now, using something like when you're using WordPress with WooCommerce, etc., that's the equivalent of like being at home and making fish and chips for yourself, right? So you are ultimately responsible for most of that. Now, you can pull in plenty of different blocks to do that. That can be the equivalent of pulling out frozen oven chips, to make your chips. It can be the equivalent of buying pre-made batter. But I think what you've got to realize is yes, it's cheaper because you're doing it yourself, a lot more of it yourself. But if you all of a sudden have 20 people come around and you don't have enough chips in the basket, or you don't have mushy peas and people want mushy peas, or the potatoes have gone out of date, then ultimately those are headaches you have to deal with. Weird analogy, I know. I can see Rory laughing. So this let's see.
I love that analogy. I'm just looking forward to coming round yours for fish and chips after this. Everything starts to unlock again.
Oh, mate, you know it, but when we're buying fish and chips from the fish and chip shop, there's no way I'm cooking fish and chips. But yes, so that's the weird analogy. As I say, may end up getting cut, but let's wait and see. Probably not. So Rory's covered the cost differences. I'm going to cover the ease of use, kind of following on from my analogy. So plain and simply, like the analogy says, you set up your own hosting with Shopify. Can be pretty straightforward. You get your website, get it plugged in, and away you go. You don't have to faff around quite as much as you do with WordPress, etc. You can set up your own payment gateways. Now, Shopify, the fees, the transaction fees Rory alluded to there are, Shopify's default payment gateway. The beauty of something that Shopify does do is they have, what they call accelerated checkout. So that basically enables you to offer your customers the ability to pay with PayPal. I think Amazon Pay is on there, Stripe, there are Apple Pay, so all of the standardized gateways that are not just a credit card or a debit card, all of those are available to you if you want, and each of those is going to charge you a different fee. But Shopify makes that really easy to enable. One click and kind of you're almost a way to go with most of those, along with providing your account details for where to send the money. Whereas with WooCommerce, there's a little bit more to it. It's definitely doable. There's no denying that. It's just as we were kind of talking about, you've got to make sure you got the curry sauce in before you can put it on the plate. What else we got? Shopify's user interface. So I've got to be honest, there are some things that this is definitely where we think the user interface could be improved. There are certain things that, it's a little bit like, oh, okay, that's a bit odd, that's a bit strange. But building the website and, the back end is probably where it's strongest. Let's be clear, right? The back end, really helpful, really standardized. You can see your orders, your payments, your shipping settings, all that stuff. That I think Shopify does make it easy. The constraints are somewhat more in the the building the look of a website, right? You are using a theme. That theme is ultimately got building blocks built in, and you can edit those building blocks. You can't necessarily drag and drop these building blocks, so it's not as easy as when you are, or it's not as accessible in regards to changeable, etc., as something like a WordPress site, but it's all very easy to do. Now, obviously, if you want something more advanced, you can obviously have an expert take a look at the code and help you with that. But ultimately, Shopify provides a pretty straightforward platform for you to build a website with no code, that fits a pretty uniform look for most websites. And then Shopify reporting, if you're paying for the real premium plans, you get all sorts of advanced reports. We found the basic stuff to be good enough. You don't really need to know a lot. Ultimately, if you can pull basic information like total sales and average order value and maybe even referral traffic, I'm honestly not sure you need a huge lot more to start or scale a business. So yeah, those are the key differences in ease of use, I would say.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, makes a lot of sense, and especially on the reporting part, I think you can also plug in Google Analytics, for example. So that's really helpful if you want to get into a bit more detail on where your users are coming from and that kind of thing. You can plug in Google Analytics, which is free, as you can for anything on the web. But that it's just as easy on Shopify.
100%.
So the last bit we just wanted to focus on was the ease of getting visitors to the store. I won't take too long on this one because this, I think you probably agree, Jake, this is a whole episode in itself, isn't it?
100%.
So I think the main thing that people focus on when they're looking at Shopify is its SEO ability. So SEO stands for search engine optimization, and that's all about how high you rank within the search engines. And to be honest, Google pretty much has a monopoly on that. So realistically, SEO means how well do you rank? Where does your listing rank in Google? So when you type in a keyword, the keyword that you're hoping to show up for, what page do you show up on? There's two schools of thought on this. Shopify, it's considered less SEO friendly because of the page structure that they have. So for you have to have it essentially creates index domains. So you have let's just take ours for example. You've got caffeinate.co.uk, and then it will have a /, and then if we want to get to a page, it will say pages / whatever the page is that we want. Or if we want products, for example, it will say, caffeinate.co.uk / product / definitely strong coffee, for example. So that additional bit of text that goes in there, that's sometimes seen as less SEO friendly because it's not getting right to the point. The most important message is that long string of what you're actually landing on. I think and I mean, I'm not an SEO expert by any stretch of imagination, but I do think that having that additional bit of text isn't too much of a bad thing. The additional flexibility it gives in adding meta descriptions, title tags, alt tags, all the different things that kind of back up your SEO. That's really easy. It's templated. You can get in there. You can essentially just go to a portion and you can add that in really easy. So I think the SEO ability of it is pretty good, but there are school of thought that people kind of say, well, you're better off on WooCommerce because with WordPress, because you can have a much more structured and a lot more cleaner tag for your URL. The other thing that I would mention, though, is the built-in marketing channels that Shopify has. So they've made a lot of strong connections with huge marketplaces like Amazon, etc. But they've also made inroads into sort of Facebook and Instagram. You can have shoppable posts now. So essentially, off your Shopify store, you can link up to your Instagram account and create posts. You take a photo of your product, and that's a shoppable post. that's really useful. And I think those kind of things can help a startup get a little bit of traction a bit more easily, because you can promote those, you can pay for some Instagram ads or some Facebook ads, and then people will essentially go through, they can see your product, and then they can click through to your site. So I think those kind of things and the trade-off of getting that, I think is really good, to be honest. But what I'm going to do is stop there on SEO, because I think we'd like to probably do a full episode on this at some point in the future. So I think, Jay, that probably pretty much clears us up, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that probably closes us out. So firstly, as Rory said at the beginning, if you found this useful, please consider subscribing either on YouTube or on podcasts, whichever you use, Apple Podcasts, or, in the Android store, etc. Wherever you're getting your podcasts. Rory said, check out our coffee website so you can see two things, right? So you're going to see what we've been able to do with Shopify. And if you've got any questions, what theme are we using, etc., anything like that, we're always happy to answer those. We'll gladly probably do an episode on that at some point as well. But if you're desperate to know, then just give us a shout. Otherwise, I think it's pretty clear we're pretty big fans of Shopify. I think it's worth clarifying, in no way, shape, or form is this a sponsored video. I would love, to be able to say that we're getting a kickback from Shopify because, free hosting, whatever. We're not. Very clear. Like, we are still paying our standard Shopify fees, just like everybody else will be. No form of advertisement here at all. This is just our honest opinions about what we found so far with, what is this, like year 3 of using Shopify at this point, Rory? I think
Must
like
be.
3.5, 4. At this point, I've kind of lost track since we launched the actual site itself. So just honest opinions, no advertising. Otherwise, guys, great, to be able to convey what we know thus far, and hopefully see you again soon.
Cheers.
Cheers, guys.